Stay at home, they did not. On the streets of London, protesters came to have their voices heard, despite the risk of coronavirus. This was loosely organised by anti-lockdown activists. Many weren't wearing masks and social distancing was non-existent. Some told us they wanted a change to the current restrictions.
We want to live free.
Freedom!
The Met Police were out in force too. There were scuffles throughout the day. At least 13 people have been arrested. Most of those were for breaching COVID regulations.
So we followed this group of protesters down through Holborn. Now a lot of people are making their way out towards Fleet Street, and there are disparate groups happening and converging together, and they're getting all their information on social media platforms like Telegram as well. And the police are playing cat and mouse, really, struggling to contain them.
Earlier today, an urgent letter was sent to the Home Secretary, organised by Liberty and other human rights organisations, signed by MPs from different parties, asking for the right to protest to be reinstated now, despite COVID. In it, they say, we call on you to expressly exempt protests from restrictions on gatherings in all tier areas. Also happening today, another protest, this time in South London, with no police vans in sight.
This is Windrush Square in Brixton, and it's a protest, but I've only seen 2 police officers that way, 1 police officer just behind the camera. It is a socially distanced one. There are masks here as well, and organisers say they're keeping people as safe as they can be. But the government have said stay-at-home order is still in place, and it should be still in place until the 29th of March.
Stand Up to Racism organised this protest. So what do they think of the one going on a couple of miles away?
I think they have the right to protest them. It's not something we shouldn't be taken off the streets. Do we agree at all with their message? No. We hold the opposite view. We want the lockdown to be, we wanted the lockdown to be purposeful. We just don't believe in taking our right away to protest.
There were thousands on the street today who agreed with her, even if they're not fighting the same cause. Stay at home might be the message the police and the government want to send when it comes to protests, but it's very clear that's not how it's working in practice.
Well, one of the MPs who have signed the letter calling for a change in the law is the Labour MP and former Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott. I spoke to her earlier and asked why she's in favour of allowing protest during a pandemic.
Nobody wants to put lives at risk, but there is a human rights issue about having vigils and protests. And if the Met is willing to work with organisers, we've seen that you can have safe vigils and safe protests, which are COVID secure.
OK, if you look at today, which is an anti-lockdown protest, I've looked at the footage. In some instances, people are not wearing masks. Many people are not wearing masks. They are walking very, very closely together, linking arms. What should the police do? You're creating more of a muddle in saying these protests should go ahead, because what do the police do in those circumstances?
I'm not anti-lockdown, and any events I've been with outside, and actually I've done very few protest events in the open air, I've always worn a mask, as have most of the people involved. There is a human right to protest, but protests which are not about, the death of a woman, not about Black Lives Matter, not about the environment, but protests which expressly put themselves at odds with the regulations.
But that's the problem with this, isn't it?
Challenge.
That's the problem with this. So you saying yes to protests that we agree with, that we think are the right issues to protest on, but no to the others.
It's not about whether I agree with the issue or not. It's about people consciously putting themselves at odds with the regulations. But where people are willing to work with the police, it seems to me we have to respect people's right to protest.
So just to be clear, for the protesters out today, the Met Police keep asking them to go home. You're saying this protest, they should go home? Or are you saying they should exercise their human rights as they might for a vigil for Sarah Everard or for Black Lives Matter?
I'm saying that they're not wearing masks, they're deliberately flouting the regulations. And obviously, you know, the police are entitled to draw to their attention that they're flouting the regulations. But where people are willing to work with the police, wear masks, socially distance, abide by the regulations, we have to respect people's right to protest.
I mean, the events of the last few weeks have been very difficult for the police across the board, a huge outpouring from women saying they don't have confidence in the police to protect them. Last night, we ran horrific CCTV footage of a police officer assaulting a woman. He was fined rather than jailed. I mean, in the current climate, what do you make of that?
I thought that was very shocking. I mean, the government's putting through legislation which will give you 10 years for, attacking a statue, and yet somebody gets fined for attacking a woman. That's a real problem. That's really shocking. I don't believe in second-guessing the courts, but that's a really shocking thing to happen, that you can get 10 years in prison for pushing a statue over, but you can get fined for wrestling, tackling, and pushing a woman over.
And that debate about the value of women, in a sense, is really pertinent at the moment. Given that outrage, do you feel that Labour's candidate for Hartlepool, Paul Williams, should now step down after having used a pretty offensive term about a woman some time ago on social media?
I think the party needs to consider, because he was imposed by the party. It wasn't the local people that were allowed to choose their candidate. It was the party at the centre which imposed him, so they need to reconsider.
But as a woman and a Labour MP, do you have a view on this yourself?
As a woman, I've been subject to more abuse online than most women MPs put together. So of course I have a view. But this was an imposed candidate, and the party leadership has to reconsider its imposition.
Diane Abbott, thank you very much for talking to us today.